Okay, members, welcome to Wrestling Book Club. We are going to be reviewing and talking about books about wrestlers or written by best wrestlers. So we'll be doing biographies and autobiographies. And we'll even read and talk about some books that are focused specifically on the wrestling business. I believe that knowledge is power, and the only way for you guys to legitimately understand how some of these wrestlers' lives have gone or how things work is you have to read. But some of y'all are so enthralled in technology that you've lost the ability to read. But I figure if I give you a little bit of a synopsis into these books, then maybe that will entice you to pick it up and read it for yourselves. Everybody's interpretation of literature is different, and I highly encourage that each one of you read books so that you can have a better understanding of the mind of the author as well as the world itself. Sometimes the world building in books can be very interesting. When it comes to autobiographies, biographies, and of course the wrestling world, you are deep diving into the world of these people and the business itself. And that's something that I think a lot of people, especially wrestling fans, should be interested in. So today, the very first book we're going to talk about is Lita's book. And Lita's book is an interesting one. I was sitting here, and it's about 2 hours long if you listen to it on Audible. It's not too long, and she's pretty fast at, giving you the deets from her book. She's not trying to hold on to anything. Now, the name of her book is called Lita, Less Traveled R.O.A.D, The Reality of Amy Dumas. So, it starts out by telling you her childhood, and essentially she talks about what she was into as a kid, where she was very much into swimming, and she got introduced into the punk rock music scene from a friend, and she began to emulate what she heard and saw through music, and that began to be her lifestyle. That's what she loved and enjoyed. She started to hang around people who started to listen to that style of music, and she ended up moving in with some of them later on in life. To be more frank and to kind of give you a little bit more context, she ultimately, her parents were together. They stayed together for a while, but as time progressed, they got a divorce, and she ended up living with her mom. And she then moved out, and she lived with her friends, and I think she was living with a guy she dated as well. And she began to dance. She was dancing to pay the bills, and then she happened to be home. Excuse me, pardon me. She happened to be home one day, and her boyfriend was watching WCW Monday Night Nitro, and she was watching it in passing, and she came across it, and she saw some matches, and one person caught her eye, and it was Rey Mysterio Jr. And Rey Mysterio was a flashy luchador that everybody knew. He's this little small guy out there wrestling with these massive big dudes. She was very concerned for him, and she began enthralled and invested in his storylines and in wrestling in general through Rey Mysterio Jr. And that's where she got the itch to actually wrestle, by seeing him. And she started to become curious about the business and how to get into it. So she started to find ways to, involve herself in it. So she danced for a while, saved up some money, and then she went all the way to Mexico. And she booked a room for $12 a night. And then she went over to the um, Lucha Libre 3 times a week. She was there, and she ended up being able to be a part of CMLL for a little while. And that's when she really started her career as a wrestler. She was very determined to become a wrestler, even though during that time, female wrestling wasn't something that was prevalent or popular. It was an afterthought. They were used as props for males, obviously, during wrestling. She networked heavily and ran into various other wrestling superstars, and of course, people that we know, like his name was different in CMLL, but Val Venus, and she ran into Kevin Quinn, and there were so many others that she ended up running into. And this was the start of how she began to lightly train and kind of get the idea of the inner workings of the business. She ended up meeting with the CMLL owner of the business. He was like the Vince McMahon of CMLL, and she ended up becoming a valet in Mexico for a little while. She would travel down there, do the job for a while, network, and then come back to the city in Virginia to work. Um, she then started to she came up with an idea to go back to Mexico and network heavily. She went and stayed at the hotel that all of the wrestlers from the states and other countries that came to Mexico to wrestle would stay at, and she networked heavily with these people so that she can get a more of a leg up, or get the next direction of where she should go in terms of training, because she was very, very adamant about getting training, even though a lot of people, especially the CMLL staff, was very hesitant to train her. They just wanted her to be a valet, a pretty face, maybe a slap here or there, but they didn't really need her to do anything else. They did have female wrestlers there, and the two wrestlers that she mentioned were the only ones that she thought were something to look at, because they wrestled very similar to the men. When Ricky and Kevin saw that Lita had that itch to wrestle, they would ask her to wrestle, or to, train a little spar, I guess you could say, with them before matches. And this is where she really felt that she got the full spark to be a wrestler. It was taking those hard, heavy bumps, which they didn't teach her how to take them. She kind of had to learn that on the fly, learning how to take a lariat, learning how to take um, basic bumps, just basics of wrestling that she was learning. And there was no, okay, this is what you do. It was just, okay, get in here. Like, we're gonna, and then they would just, throw her into the turnbuckle. She hit the turnbuckle, and Fesh said she figured out how to do everything. After a while, you learn how to duck when you need to duck. Essentially, she had to learn in the throes of wrestling in order to learn how to wrestle. Excuse me. I don't know why I'm yawning so much today, but I apologize. However, this gave her that fire that she needed to be fully dedicated to learning how to wrestle. Now, she was offered to learn wrestling full time in Chicago, and she was also offered a position by by two people named Strawberry and Slim, to go to NWA down in the Carolinas, and they were the owners of that particular territory. And she was offered to go down there and wrestle. And she didn't want to do it because she felt like she was not prepared enough. She didn't know enough to wrestle. She wasn't good enough. And Strawberry basically told her, like, don't worry about it. There are a lot of people who aren't good enough to wrestle. The girls aren't great, but, it'll be good TV. And she was just like, I don't want to be, just a pretty face and somebody who's terrible at wrestling. I want to be good at it. So she went to Kevin, and they went and to Chicago, and she began wrestling. She was wrestling two separate sessions. There was one in the morning, and then there was one in the evening. She was the only woman in this particular set of wrestlers that were learning how to wrestle. And then once she got everything straight, it was 7 days straight she was doing this. And once she got everything straight after the time frame of her wrestling, it wasn't just 7 days she wrestled and then left. She wrestled for 7 days straight for a number of weeks. And once she felt like she was, pretty solid on the wrestling front, she gave Strawberry another call. She was accepted to go down there, and she went down to North Carolina to learn to wrestle on TV. Instead, her first match was with Strawberry. It wasn't the best match. She said that Strawberry did, talk with her and go over how they were supposed to lay out this match, and to play more to Lita's strengths, which were at the time the core basics. But in the midst of the match, Strawberry completely forgot the plan, and Lita had to go off the cuff. She wasn't skilled enough to call moves in the ring just yet, or she at least wasn't. She didn't feel comfortable doing that because she was such a rookie and so green, and she felt like she needed to play off of the lead rather than have the lead play off of her, if that makes sense. So Miss Strawberry did end up winning the match, and she ended up winning with a power bomb, which I imagine that had to be gnarly to take a power bomb in your first wrestling match and you've never wrestled a day in your life. In terms of having a legit match with someone, that had to be fucking nuts. Okay, I would have cried. Dead ass. But she goes on to say that she wasn't really keen on the scene down in Charlotte, where she was. Strawberry and Slim were heavy partiers, and Lita just wasn't about that life. While she looked like a partier because she dressed like a punk rocker and had a particular vibe, it she really wasn't like that. She didn't really care for that style of partying. And you could tell that she felt that there was going to be some tension there because their personalities were not compatible enough for her to hang out there. And of course, she was lonely. She didn't really have anybody that was, that would vibe with her on her level. And everybody was doing what Strawberry and Slim was doing, which she doesn't go into grave detail, but you can kind of get the gist of what she means by the heavy partying, the sex, the drugs, and all that other kind of stuff. And she just felt like this was not a scene that she wanted to stay in. And she was ready to go. After a certain amount of time, she felt like she was like, yeah, this isn't my scene. So the interesting thing though is, in the same vein, Charlotte is where she ends up meeting Matt and Jeff Hardy. She says she was impressed with them and their athleticism and their ability, and they just seem to be genuinely nice people. But she also was very impressed um with their just their personalities. She vibed with them more. They were a little bit more chill. They talked about music, and they just had a better time. She had a better time with Matt and Jeff than she did with anybody that was hanging out with Strawberry and Slim. So she clung to them. They were somebody that she really enjoyed being around. Matt, more specifically, was someone that she got a little ping with. You know what I'm saying? She had that little spark with Matt. He caught her eye, to make it clear. She ends up going back and meeting going to a show for ECW, and Tommy Dreamer was there along with some other wrestlers. Pardon, I have my notes, so I had to make sure I was on track here. But she ends up meeting up with Tajiri and Super Crazy. Now, Tajiri was down in CMLL at one point, and Lita knew of him, and she said they had some minor interactions, but they weren't that close. So she was really glad to see a familiar face, but to also be able to work with Tajiri in whatever capacity that she could. So she asked Tommy Dreamer, who was running the promotion in terms of like a showrunner, but ahead of the show, if she could have a few sparring sessions with Tajiri and Super Crazy. Tommy Dreamer told her to have at it. And as she was, in the ring, they were doing her and Karanas and everything in between. And she was doing them right with them, backflips and everything. Tommy saw her potential and offered her some time on TV. Which, of course, he offered her an exhibition match, which she accepted. She went up against one of the girls. It wasn't the greatest match, but it was a testament to show what Lita could actually do and her potential. And Tommy saw it and completely locked in. And so he gave her some time on TV. He was paired up with a guy named Danny. And she said that Danny she'll always be forever grateful for. She ended up working with Danny for quite some time as his valet, and the character that she played, I think she played his girlfriend. She said that he was genuinely, oh my gosh, excuse me for yawning, was genuinely a nice, really sweet guy to her. He never ever tried anything or treated her disrespectfully. He made her feel like she was completely safe and protected. And he did protect her and make her feel safe. She said he was completely professional with her. He never tried anything. He didn't hit on her. She said he was her favorite person in the entire world, and that she will forever be grateful to him for how he treated her with so much respect. And that says a lot, because you have to understand, during a time in the business and just in the world in general, misogyny was the core for at the forefront of everything. And men just didn't value women the way that they should have. And I'm not saying that things are 20, 50 times better now, but there's a more pushback from women to be respected. And this is being reciprocated slowly but surely. And so nowadays, that type of behavior from some men is considered to be toxic and would not be tolerated. Whereas back then, it was just something that a woman had to deal with. You were pretty, you were attractive, a man was going to hit on you whether you wanted it or not. And even if his intentions were sincere, he would also get lumped in with the rest of the jerks, because they all would come off the same. So Lita, at first, I guess it seems that she was a little apprehensive knowing what goes on in the business and how things would work. But Danny, proved her wrong, and essentially provided her with a safe space and treated her like, you know, she was a sister, like she was somebody that he loved, which I'm sure eventually he did platonically love Lita as a friend. And he protected her as such, which was, shout out to you, Danny, for being a shining dude and being a good guy just in general. He had previously lost his mother during this time, and he was the sole breadwinner for his little brother. So he had a lot on his plate. And despite all of that, he protected and did everything he had to for Lita as well. So he was all around a very good dude. Love that. Very, very happy, especially during that time. Like, I can't stress that enough. During that time, a guy treating a woman with some respect, I'm sorry, that has to be praised, because it's very, very rare. Okay? Very rare. Anywhoosies, she she said the backstage was the Wild Wild West. And she said there was no authority to check anything that was going on back there. If something went wrong, you essentially had to deal with it yourself, which explains a lot and confirms what a lot of wrestlers used to say and have been saying for years about the backstage locker room politics. She confirmed it very vaguely, but she was like, the way some people handle it was they would pull these gnarly pranks like shitting in people's bags, which I think is beyond disgusting. I would never want to wake up one day and see human feces in my bag. Somebody got to die. Okay? And she was like, you could either square up, shit in somebody's bag, act a fool or whatever, but there was no system of checks and balances back there to put people in line when necessary. There was none of that. So I thought that was a very interesting point to make. It goes in line too with the misogyny and everything, but I just thought that was a very interesting point to make. Anywhoosies. So she went to ECW and started working, and she was able to get her first match on the show. She said it wasn't good, but it wasn't bad either. And she before that, Paul Heyman had her working, and he wanted her to change her character to Miss Congeniality. And Paul Heyman wanted her to be from New York, have a very strong New York accent, just giving you all the New York bravado that she could muster. And Lita's from Virginia. She doesn't know anything about this. She's just like, what? And she had no character training, no acting training whatsoever. And that was an aspect of wrestling that she did not consider. That was an aspect of wrestling that she overlooked. Despite, having some semblance of understanding of how the storylines worked and everything, her biggest goal was to maintain her ability to wrestle. It was to gain the knowledge and the ability to wrestle. That was the education she was soaking up. She didn't think about character work, vignettes, promos, or any of those things. So she lacked in that department around that time. And she said that Paul Heyman, gave her cue points. He was talking so fast and saying it so strange. She just did not understand what he wanted her to convey. It just wasn't there. So eventually they got it together, and she ended up being given 2 different debuts. So for ECW, she debuted in a match at ECW Heatwave. This was their pay-per-view, and she ended up debuting there. But she had another minor debut, and that was in the WWE. Matt and Jeff were, having their Raw debut, and they invited Lita, since she was in town, to come, and she did. And because of that, the Godfather's wife was back there, and at that time, the Godfather was having a pimp and hoe character. So they would go to the strip club and get beautiful women from the strip club, and those would be the women that were a part of his hoe train. Okay. Now, this particular night that Lita got the opportunity to be in the hoe train, they sent over some strippers that were less than favorable looking. And the Godfather's wife was like, "Hey, Lita, do you think you want to be in the whole train? Because the strippers we have, while they're great, they're just not going to put him over." And that's wrestling speak for they're ugly. I'm not the one telling the story. Don't get mad at me. Okay? So, this is part 1 of Lita's book. Don't worry, I am breaking this up into smaller parts so that you don't have to sit and listen to over an hour of me, over analyzing and talking. I'm breaking it down into 25 to 30-minute pieces. That way you guys can have a little bit more time to digest each piece of the book. The book is only 2 hours on Audible, so if you want to go and download it yourself, you definitely can. Thank you guys so much for listening, and look out for part 2. It should be coming up next, and that'll be deep diving into the rest of Lita's rise in WWE. And of course, you get some little snippets into her relationship with Matt Hardy, and you'll hear some little snippets about her relationship with Edge as well. Messy boots. But overall, the book is mostly about her and her career in wrestling, and how she was so headstrong and determined to be a wrestler. It's a pretty decent book. So keep on listening. I'm going to get part 2 up very soon, I promise. You when I post this for the rest of the subbies, share this video and give me a thumbs up, please. Members and subscribers, give me a thumbs up. This will push it in the algorithm, and it will allow people to be able to latch on to my content. I appreciate y'all, and I love y'all, and I'll see you in the next one. Part 2 is coming up next. Look out for it.